Good afternoon. Good afternoon. That's much better. So I'm going to first say that please bear with me. I have been trying to get over a cold for the last week and my voice is failing me, but I hope that it holds up for 15 minutes for me to get through this presentation. So you all be kind. And besides, it took a lot for me to get here today. I was stuck in Jacksonville, Florida last night. I think some of you all were too, but we made it here. So I'm so excited to be here with you today, though. I think, Dr. Gregg, you gave me an extra last name. It's just Van Keeta Brown, no Jones, but thank you. Do we have slides? Where are slides? Okay, there we go. So this session really is a session in which we hope to provoke you a bit, right? Earlier today, Dr. Cortinez led a working session with you all, and you all had amazing ideas. And I want you to continue that as we talk about environmental justice, okay? So we're gonna poke you a little bit. After we finish talking, we're gonna sort of engage you a bit more on this topic, and we really wanna hear your thoughts around it because as Dr. Gregg mentioned, you know, we're here in this space because of the things that our ancestors have done, but we're looking for you to carry the torch, okay? All right, Terry, are you with us? Okay, thank you. So the subtext of our session is climate change and environmental justice, governance, and information in a multi-level world. Next slide, please. Next slide, Terry.
Nikita, I'm changing the slides. Are you not seeing them changed on your end?
I don't know. What'd you say? Okay.
There it is. Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay, so this is going to be a very fluid discussion as we work through the technology. So what I want to do is talk about executive orders for a little bit, give you some historical context on how we sort of got here in this time and place with regard to environmental justice. So the very first thing that the president did, can we go back one slide, please? What's happening?
For
Is
some
it on
reason,
automatic?
it's not meshing up with what's on my screen for some reason. So I'm on your first slide right now.
Is it moving by itself? As I mentioned, this is going to be very entertaining. So what you see on the screen may or may not jive with what I'm saying. I'm not sure how this is going to work out.
We're on your slide right now.
Okay. So the first executive order, the very first executive order that the president signed on his first day in office was entitled Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities Through the Federal Government. Okay. This particular executive order said first and foremost that the government will privy equity for all, period. Okay. Because what we recognize is that we had not been doing that. And so President Biden recognized that we need to do a better job of that, okay? So for those who are marginalized, underserved, historically marginalized, we will now turn a lens to equity. That is his first executive order that he signed, his first day in office. The next thing that this executive order says is that each agency will examine internally its programs, its policies, its practices to look for barriers to equity. So how are we not serving communities? Who are we leaving out? Who's not at the table? Who's being forgotten? So we went about the business of doing that. So that's the second thing that is to be highlighted from that particular executive order. And one of the other things that it says is that we will engage underserved communities in ways that we have not done before. So we begin to talk to these communities, we begin to involve them in conversation, and also, and Dr. Spanrad mentioned this in his remarks, co-development of our products and services. So we invite communities to the table to ask them, what do you need? How can we help you? And really, what have we been doing wrong? So that executive order spoke to those particular things. And just to reiterate, when we talk about executive orders, these are the things that help government achieve its business, right? So for President Biden, These are the marching orders of the federal government. So this is how work is carried out. Now, am I controlling these slides? I need to move it. Am I moving it?
You should see your next slide.
All right, I think we're okay now. So one of the other executive orders, and this is really important, that brought us to this particular place, is tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. This executive order says we are on a very short timeline to right this wrong with regard to climate change. We have a short window when we can course correct. So we recognize that we really have to address this in sort of fast order, right? The other thing it says is that all of government now will prioritize the climate crisis. That we will all, no matter what your business is in the federal government, you will now make it your business to address the climate crisis. And the final thing that it says, and this is the most important, is that we will now privy environmental justice. All federal agencies now have a mandate that, again, no matter what your business is, you will now look for and participate in environmental justice. So these executive orders have brought us to this place in time. So we have equity and we have environmental justice. They've all brought us here to this space. Next slide. So just for context, and I know that you all are very intelligent and you know what environmental justice is, but I just want to unpack it for you just a second so that we all are having a conversation about the same definition. And this is the definition by the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. And it says that environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. So in essence, environmental justice is a movement that says, no matter who you are, what background you come from, what you look like, who you love, that you have the right to live in an environment that is safe and healthy, and moreover, no community should bear the brunt of environmental injustice. Nobody should have to live in a situation by which they are impacted disproportionately than any other community. So that's what we mean when we talk about environmental justice. So these are the things that have brought us here. And there's one more slide with regard to executive orders, because these are important too. We have executive orders on equity and justice for Asian Americans, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islanders, the White House initiative on HBCUs, the White House initiative on Hispanic excellence in education, and also the White House executive order on Native Americans and tribal colleges. And there's one other which I think is important, and that is on leveraging indigenous traditional knowledge. Because what we know is that indigenous communities have been stewards of this land for millennia. And so we need to make space and create space for those different types of knowledges to participate and contribute to addressing the climate challenge that we have. So I wanted to recognize those executive orders to let you all know that there's a lot of stuff going on in this space that contribute to where we are in this conversation that we're having. Next slide, please. So now that I've talked about sort of the history and how we've gotten here, I want to talk just a little bit about what NOAA is doing in the EJ space. Dr. Gregg is also going to talk about that as well. But a few things that we've done most recently. Next slide. So I mentioned the executive order on equity that said we would have an internal lens to the policies and programs that we do, and to ensure that those programs are equitable. The first thing that we did in the first 90 days of the new administration was to do an internal assessment, equity assessment of our programs and policies within NOAA. We had several programs which we examined to see what were the barriers, what were our barriers with regard to access for communities, what were our challenges. And then we also went about the business of doing a course correct to ensure that our programs and policies are now more in alignment with equity, and that we definitely have a lens toward that. The other thing we did was engage with environmental justice groups, and this is an ongoing conversation, right? So we met with Outdoor Afro, we've met with Green Latinos, we've met with the National Wildlife Federation, and we've also met with the Green Lighting Institute. Again, to engage these different groups to understand, how can we play in this space with you? How can we partner with you? How can we build synergy with you? What have we forgotten? What don't we know? What do we need to know to move the needle in this space? And so we've been talking to them, and it's an ongoing conversation. The other thing we've done is tribal consultations. And these are listening sessions with our tribal communities. Because let's be clear, sometimes we have forgotten these communities. And so we want to engage them again. We want to ask the questions, how can we be helpful? How can we partner? How can we be in relationship with you? What are we doing wrong, right? And so we're having these conversations with our tribal communities. And then finally, and that doesn't mean this is the last thing, but we've also done a series of climate and equity roundtables. This has happened throughout the country with different communities to understand the local climate challenges within those communities. So whether it be heat, wildfires, or coastal inundation, or inland flooding, we've had conversations with these communities to understand what their challenges are. And as Dr. Spinrad said, co-development. So with these communities, we have developed proposals, and we'll be funding these ideas to address these issues locally. Next slide. So those are some of the things that we've been doing. Okay, so what, right? Okay, so we've done this stuff. What now, right? Well, the so what is what many of you already know, right? Climate change, it is here, it is happening. It is very, very present and real in our lives. In fact, raise your hand if you are working on a project or have interested in anything that has to do with climate change. Raise your hand. That should be everybody in this room. That should be everybody in this room, because climate change, again, is impacting you on levels which you may not even realize sometimes. Okay? So the next time I ask that question, I want everybody to raise their hands. But the thing is that, next slide. This is the fight of all of our lives, right? And that's why we want to have this conversation with you, because I believe that this community of cooperative science centers is where we're going to find the answers. I believe in all of the students, the faculty, the staff. I believe in everyone who's in this space. I believe you all have the answers to help us solve this problem. I really do. Next slide. And I just want to mention one other thing. Climate change is not new. It has been happening for a very long time. And so is environmental justice. Dr. Gregg talked about, that our sisters and brothers and mothers and aunties and uncles and grandparents have been fighting this fight for a very long time. And that is actually true. The history of environmental justice goes back to the Memphis sanitation worker strike of 1968. If you don't know anything about it, please look it up. But the short is, Black people in Memphis, the sanitation workers, were experiencing unhealthy and unsafe working conditions. And 2 of those folks died, and they said, we've had enough. And so they mobilized to get a union. Dr. King joined that movement. And so the spirit and the essence of that movement is still with us today. And as I mentioned, and Dr. Gregg mentioned, Black, brown, indigenous communities are disproportionately affected by climate change. And so while the movement started outside of academia, it was very much a people's movement, and very much still is. Many minority serving institutions, particularly HBCUs, found a space and rallied in the environmental justice movement, and they still do. And so again, I bring you back to this place that you all as cooperative science centers have a space here, you have a place here to make a change in this particular time. So as I bring this to a close, I want to do an old school roll call to action. Next slide. So what I want to happen is, because I know y'all tired, I want NCAS to stand up. NCAS M, please. Stand up for me. Stand up. NCAS M. That wasn't a suggestion. That was more like a directive. NCAS M. What would it? Cindy. Come on. Jeanette, don't make me call your names. I know everybody. Stand up. NCAS M. There we go. Don't sit down. I want you to think about this for a second. What can you bring to bear in the EJ space? Hold on, just stand up. Crest, where my Crest people at? Stand up for me. Stand up. This is a roll call challenge. Crest, my big data people. What will you contribute to the climate change crisis and EJ? LMR, CSC, stand up. Stand up. How will you use your superpowers to address EJ and the climate change crisis? And finally, the host institution who has a Center for Environmental Justice, CCME, stand up, please. What will be your legacy in the climate change and environmental justice crisis? So we're here. The challenge has been thrown. The gauntlet is down. How will you meet the moment? Cooperative Science Centers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Brown, very much. I want to make a few points before we bring on our next speaker. And the first thing I want to acknowledge is that environmental justice communities, they're just the ground zero. All of us are impacted by climate change and environmental issues, but the challenge and opportunity for you is to, if we can solve the problem for the environmental justice communities, then we can solve the problem for everybody else, right? Because they're experiencing it the most, and they have a lot of information to give to you all to help you come up with the right solutions. And I'm really glad that Dr. Brown mentioned the history of EJ, and she mentioned Martin Luther King. And I think what she said in her talk really reflects a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King. In a real sense, all life is interrelated. All are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the interrelated structure of reality. And this is what y'all are learning in your classes and in your research. And so I hope y'all are going to remember that. So our next speaker is going to talk about environmental justice in the academy. And her name is Terry, I've got to get her bio right so I can, it's Terry Marie Adams. Dr. Adams is a professor in the Department of Sociology and Criminology at Howard University. She currently serves as an Associate Dean of Research responsible for the research and training portfolio of the graduate school. She also serves as the Deputy Director of the NOAA Cooperative Science Center in Atmospheric Sciences and Meteorology at Howard. Dr. Adams' research takes an interdisciplinary approach to examining issues related to emergency management, behavioral responses to severe weather and climate, and the impact of trauma and disasters on individuals and organizations. She is also the author of the book, Policing During in Natural Disasters, Stress, Resilience, and the Challenges of Emergency Management. This book takes a critical review of the challenges faced by first responders before, during, and after natural disasters. Please welcome Dr. Terry Marie Adams.
Thank you. I'm hoping that you're still viewing the slides. Is that correct?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to put a finer point on some of the comments or some of the points that Dr. Brown noted, and I hope you really heard or felt her passion. She talked or gave some basic information related to climate change and environmental justice, and we want to just make sure that we're all on the same page. We know that most of you are aware of these issues, or at least you have some sense of them, and some of you are actually working on research projects related to them, but not all of you. So we want to make sure we're all on the same page here. So when we talk about climate change, you should know that it's caused by the greenhouse effect, which is basically a trapping of the sun's warmth in the planet's lower atmosphere. And the global temperatures have increased over the last 100 years and has especially increased twice the rate of the previous decades in the last 40 years. So we're on a steady incline of the planet actually warming. So you see here a graphic of the annual temperatures and the increases in annual temperatures around the US, and you see the differences between the winter temperatures and the summer temperatures that relates to the warming effects that we are experiencing. And there are side effects to the Earth's warming. So for every 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming, we're going to experience more heat waves and longer summer seasons and shorter winter seasons. And for every 2 degrees Celsius of global warming, we're going to have, again, more extreme heat. We're going to potentially risk reaching critical thresholds that are going to impact our health as well as agriculture. So I'm going to play this video. Hopefully you can hear some of the...
Hi, this is Bill Putman. I'm a climate scientist at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. What you're looking at is a supercomputer model of carbon dioxide levels in the Earth's atmosphere. The visualization compresses 1 year of data into a few minutes. Carbon dioxide is the most important greenhouse gas affected by human activity. About half of the carbon dioxide emitted from fossil fuel combustion remains in the atmosphere, while the other half is absorbed by natural land and ocean reservoirs.
So I'm going to stop right now. And I believe that Dr. Sanders, who's a recent graduate of NCAS-M and is serving as my postdoc right now, if she could ask the students, what do you notice the most when you're looking at this short video clip? Does anybody want to volunteer to answer that question?
We need an answer to the question. Can you repeat the question again?
What are you noticing the most when you're viewing this video clip?
Northern Hemisphere.
What are you noticing? Anything in particular? Okay, first off, you should be noticing.
We got one. We
Okay.
got one coming.
Okay, go ahead.
The mic is not on.
Oh, I can answer the question.
Okay, go ahead in the blue.
It was more red up near the poles, so I'm assuming that means it was hotter near that area. It was more reddish, yellowish.
Okay. Thank you for
What
that.
about the young lady in the red?
I noticed more red in the northern hemisphere.
Mhm.
Okay. Did you hear their response?
I did. Thank you. Thank you very much. They were very good responses. So yes, so we know that you have more of as you just noted, countries burning more fossil fuels than others. And climate change is largely caused by the burning of fossil fuels, as well as the cutting of forest and farming of livestock. And we notice in the lower hemisphere, you have less CO2 emissions. Another thing that I wanted you to notice is that you see that the Earth's atmosphere is basically what happens in one location impacts other locations. And so that it's not that any of us are safe, really. So if something happens in one part of the country, if there's a tremendous forest fire, there's potential that the pollutants from that forest fire can impact other cities, towns, and states. So we're all interconnected. And I have another question. What are some of the risks associated with climate change? Are you all aware of the risk?
Okay, we need an answer to what are some of the risks associated with climate change? Coastal flooding,
Very
ahead.
good.
The melting of polar ice caps.
the melting of the polar ice caps, sea level rise,
Mhm.
ocean acidification,
Absolutely.
I was gonna say desertification.
droughts and heat waves,
Absolutely. Any other volunteers?
animal what? Animal range shifts.
Okay.
Very good, keep going. Chloral bleaching,
Mhm.
more intense storms. What about food? Food scarcity,
Yes.
Increase of
wildfires.
prices.
Okay, very good. Very good. We got a couple more. Just scream it out. Climate refugees.
Yes.
Look at
Thank you.
Mexico. Look at our border with Mexico.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay.
Eutrophication.
Okay.
Okay, we got one more.
Slowing down the thermal handling circulation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very much.
Thank you. Excellent
Okay,
response.
Doc, we got a lot of really good answers.
Okay, awesome. Excellent responses there. Thank you. So some of you mentioned just about all of the effects, or most of the effects, right? And there are a couple more I wanted you to think about. I think one person mentioned food insecurity, or she'd said something that was similar to food insecurity. So we're going to see economic impacts as well. We're going to see increased poverty levels and increased risk for conflicts. Some of the conflicts that we have experienced over the last few decades have actually been initiated by things associated with climate change. We don't always think about that and how it impacts droughts and the lack of resources in various places around the world. If you look at Syria and the Syria refugee crisis, that's pretty much a really good example of that. And so you're going to see an increase, or there's going to be a risk of the increase of conflicts, civil war, and in-group conflicts. So climate change has many different impacts. So when you think about migration patterns, we know that right now, currently about 1% of the world's population lives in places that are considered to be hot zones, places where it's not really healthy for people to live. But by the year 2070, that number is going to increase, is predicted to be increased by 19%. And oftentimes when we think about the impacts of climate change, we don't really think about the impacts within this country. But we know that this country is impacted. As one of the previous slides, I showed you that we have warming effects throughout various places, throughout this nation, basically. And we're going to see migration patterns or potential for people to need to migrate even within this country, particularly as we experience droughts and increase in risk for forest fires. So as I noted just maybe a slide ago, that poverty is going to increase as a result of climate change. And I thought this was an important quote to share from the IPCC report, the recent report, that climate change is projected to be a poverty multiplier, which means that its impacts are expected to make the poor poorer and the total number of people living in poverty greater. So what does that mean? It means that folks that we know, it means that the communities that some of us have come from, it means that those that are the most vulnerable are going to be impacted. And so we should be really thinking about, as Dr. Brown said, what can we do to try to help mitigate the impact of climate change? So Dr. Brown shared a little bit about this, in terms of giving working definitions. And of course, Dr. Bragg did as well. But just to, again, put a finer point on things, climate justice is a term used to think about the ethical and the political implications of climate change. And it takes climate change out of just the STEM fields and more or less places it in the social justice sphere, so that we're thinking about climate change as a social justice issue, which in fact it is. It takes on a humanitarian approach to looking to protect the most vulnerable who are impacted by climate change. And if you think back to a slide I showed a few slides ago, the video, you notice that the lower hemisphere folks are emitting less CO2, but yet they are in fact being hit the hardest by the effects of climate change. So climate change is a social justice issue for a number of reasons. One, its causes are rooted in social inequalities, and the most politically and economically marginalized communities and nations, as I just noted, contribute less, but yet they suffer the most, such that the have and the have-nots feel it unequally. And this is true whether we're talking about across the US or whether we're talking about globally. So climate justice and environmental justice are really intertwined. They're not the same thing, but they are closely aligned. So just to give a working definition as it relates to environmental justice, it is defined as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. And it was a term that was coined by Dr. Ben Chavez, who was the director of the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice back in the 80s. And we're going to talk a little bit more about him on the upcoming slides, or about this particular movement in the 1980s. And it is a term that was used in response to a specific incident in Warren County, North Carolina, that you'll see a short video clip on in a second. So I have a question for the audience. Do we want climate change harms to be spread equally, or do we want to remove the harms when we think of climate justice?
We have some answers. Do we want? We have some answers. Here we go.
I would say remove the harms.
Okay.
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 We got one over here.
Natural disasters are pretty much inevitable. However, there are anthropogenic impacts that can be mitigated and adaptations that humans can do in fight of climate change. So we kind of have to find the balance in between.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Dr. Bragg, I'm going to go to the next slide.
Okay.
Thank you for those responses. So again, just to share a little bit more information about the origins of environmental justice, I think one of the things that we're trying to bring home to you all is that this is nothing new, and that these movements have been rooted in things that our ancestors have done in the past. And now is the time for us to pick up the mantle. So this video just gives a little bit of information about the Warren County, what happened in the 1982. So I should, before I say that, I want to say that in addition to the environmental justice moment that Dr. Brown talked about in Memphis, there was also a fight in that same year in Harlem, New York, against the water waste plant being constructed in Harlem. And while they weren't successful necessarily as it relates to stopping it, they did put into place, or that movement basically persisted throughout time. And one of the major players in that movement, Dave Dinkins, went on to become the prominent political figure in New York, and ended up being able to enact a bill that didn't, again, end the use of the water waste plant in Harlem, but what it did is it forced put in measures, I should say, better way to phrase this, such that the community wouldn't have to smell some of the toxic waste, and that put more safeguards into place. So it shows you the connection between politics and the social justice movements of environmental justice and climate justice, that it's important to pay attention to the interconnection of these things. Should also say that Cesar Chavez also played a major role in the environmental justice movement as well, looking to protect farm workers in the 1960s against insecticides. So, but generally, when we think about the birth of EJ, we think about the Warren County environmental justice movement. And again, I'm just going to share just maybe 3 minutes of this particular video.
My name is Bill Kearney. I grew up in Warren County. Matter of fact, this is my family church.
My name is Dolly Burwell, and I was born in Warren and Vance County.
I'm Wayne Mosley. I was born and raised not too far from this very site.
When I came along in Warren County, it was still a farm community.
I grew up in segregated schools.
We're a rural community that was by some considered poor.
It was not a pleasant experience, but I had the love and support of a big family, an extended family, and a wonderful community.
During 1978, Buck Ward owned a transformer company in Raleigh. As part of the insulation, there was an oil that contained PCBs, or polychlorinated biphenyls. That carcinogen was very difficult to dispose of, very expensive.
PCBs had been dumped along the roadsides of the state of North Carolina by Ward's transformer illegally.
Because the state of North Carolina did not have a toxic dump site, one had to be established.
It was evident to me that the state was going to put the PCB dump in Warren County.
They said, well, let's take the path of least resistance.
Because it was basically politically impotent, and because it was a poor county. Those made for conditions where the state thought that it wouldn't be any problem putting a landfill.
Something needed to be done. Here at Cody Springs Baptist Church, the church opened its doors up to us. This church is located approximately 2.5 miles from the actual site.
I remember there were meetings here, there were organization meetings, there were marches that started from the church, and the church played a significant role in being a hub.
What does God require of us? but to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God. So they saw that as part of what God required them to do, to stand up against injustice.
Just the audacity of someone who comes and just dumps in your community. And the Bible says, do unto others as have you done unto you.
The only thing we could do was to raise our voices and to stand up against what we knew was an injustice. We were really not trying to start a movement. It turned into a movement.
I think I was inspired that day. For some reason, I was working in Raleigh and had only asked off for a day, thinking I was come up, participate.
Children was a part of it. My own 8-year-old daughter, who I thought was going to school, and she said, well, I'm gonna go with you to protest. And as a mother, you know, I knew that the trucks would be carrying toxic waste and wasn't sure that I would be safe, and certainly didn't want to put her in any danger. But I couldn't say to her, this is worth putting my life on the line for, and this is something you can't stand up for too. It was about justice.
During that march, time was frozen and we were caught up in the emotion of what we were doing. I remember leaving, I remember the joy of camaraderie, and I remember, but before we knew it, we were here.
And it was the first time in my history that I saw whites, Black, and Native Americans in this county really come together and stand up.
We were met by approximately 50 highway patrol, full riot gear. There were helmets, face shields, batons.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. It just gives you a little snapshot of what these folks are willing to do to protect their communities. And this is one of many kinds of efforts that have happened over the years where people have stepped up to say, you know, not in my backyard, and where people are in, oftentimes, you know, when communities seek to find places for, you know, water waste or toxic dumpings, they look to put them in communities that they think or that they know are vulnerable, and that where people aren't going to have the loudest voice or generally don't have the same kind of political clout as folks who have access to more resources. But this is an example of a community that had less resources, but yet were able to basically start a movement. So I'm going to share a little bit more about the continuation and recognition of environmental justice. And I believe it was either Dr. Brown or Dr. Bragg kind of noted some of these things. But we know in 1992, Bush founded the Office of Environmental Justice inside of the EPA. And then in 1994, Clinton issued an executive order for environmental justice to include minority communities and low-income populations. He enacted an order, but it was never signed into a bill. It was never became law by Congress. So when George Bush came around, he shifted the EJ focus away, less of a focus on minority communities and low-income populations to basically environmental justice for all people. In 2009, Obama recommitted the White House to environmental justice. However, no new bills were passed. And then I think we all know what happened during the Trump administration. There was a lot of undercutting of the EPA. Basically, his administration rolled back more than 100 environmental rules. So I was going to show this video, but maybe I won't. But I just want to note that there are many places, as I noted, throughout this country where you have places where people are getting sick as a result of toxic waste being dumped into communities. And so this video clip was going to show a town in Louisiana where you have the rate of cancer is about 700 to 800 times the rate of the nation. And it's largely because I should say, of the toxics that these folks are breathing in and are being exposed to, so that the plants in this community are, the chemical plants are emitting these toxins and people are breathing them in. So if you get a chance later on, just Google Cancer Alley. I don't want to take up too much time here, but I think it's important for people to be aware that these communities exist, and that it's unfair that vulnerable folks, or that anybody should have to put their lives on the line just so people can make a profit. So thinking about the indigenous population, when I teach climate change and social justice class, I talk about the indigenous populations. I think it's important to realize that they were some of the first impacted by climate change in this country. And when you talk about indigitizing environmental justice, we're talking about centering First Nation issues. And historically in this nation, when we've thought about economic surplus, or that economic surplus gains were sought, it often relied on displacing people and desecrating the lands of the indigenous populations. And it involved the commodification of land as property. And it's important to know that the indigenous environmental justice movement is seeking to balance out the imbalances. And it's important for all of us to be aware that for some communities in this country, around the world actually, that the land is more about cultural practices and having some kind of connection to the land, and less about how can we use the land for monetary gains. And so there are definitely cultural differences in how perception of land and place is important. And we're seeing that indigenous populations are impacted the most because they rely on the land for their cultural practices and for their way of life in general. So again, their culture and identities are linked to their place of origin. And so it's important for these communities to be able to protect their land, because it's a way of protecting their way of life. So now I'm going to switch to, as Dr. Brown kind of put down a challenge for the CSCs to think about what can we do within the academic community. So I'm sure some of the students are thinking, well, you know, I don't want to be political, really. I want to do my science. Well, what can you do within your frame of work to look at issues related to climate change or environmental justice? And maybe it's not a topic you want to pick up for your dissertation, but maybe it's something that you could think about within your local community or even within your campus. So the next few slides are going to talk a little bit about a project that we are doing within NCAS, where we are seeking to integrate social and behavior solutions to extreme heat to decrease impacts on historically underserved and socially vulnerable communities. So we believe that this work is important, I should say, because we know that the population growth is almost exclusively in urban communities. And we know that climate change impacts urban communities at an alarming rate. And one of the deadliest forms of excessive heat, although it doesn't get a lot of attention, it's not necessarily sexy like a tornado blowing through or hurricane, but you have more people dying of the impacts of extreme heat than you have any other kind of weather within this country. And in addition to that, there are dangerous health effects as well as economic impacts. So as I noted before, the poor are most at risk for climate change. And as the quote states here, extreme heat exposure is highly unequal and most severely impacts the urban poor. So I'm going to blow through these next few slides because I don't want to take up too much of our time here. But we are engaged in interdisciplinary integrative citizen science here with this particular project. So it includes atmospheric scientists, sociologists like myself, computer scientists, and some of our scholars who are communication scientists. And we are seeking to build relationships with the community. We are set to do some focus groups within the local community in Baltimore. Why Baltimore? Well, it's a great city. I'm sorry, I said state, but I meant city. I'm from Baltimore. It's densely populated. It is a city where you have extremes between the haves and the have-nots. And there are places where there is vegetation, there are many places where there's not, particularly in the urban centers of Baltimore. Trying to move on from this slide. Okay. These are profiles that we've already started to build for this project, looking at the connection between extreme heat and the folks who live in impoverished communities and the differences between those communities versus other communities where they're not, it's a less, or folks who are actually living in poverty. And what we have found in conducting focus groups at various points in time, that people know, or they're aware that there are some health risks associated with extreme heat, but they don't necessarily personalize it. So what this project is attempting to do is to actually personalize those risks so that we can help inform Baltimore's mitigation and climate plans, climate adaptation plans, so that we can help them develop both short and long-term mitigation and adaptation plan activities. So this is just a little bit about our preliminary findings. I'm not going to go through that because this is just an example of what can be done. I should go to the next slide and share that this spring, we're going to pilot test air monitoring devices. We're meeting with community members, and we are seeking to examine real time the differences in heat exposure for both indoor and outdoor conditions, so that we're having students pilot test their air monitoring devices, but we're going to also give those devices to community members who are going to participate in the study. And we're seeking to examine the impact of extreme heat on behavior responses through data that's going to be collected through a smartphone app. So the outcomes that we're seeking is to heighten public awareness of heat risks, collect actionable data to enhance mitigation and resilience plans, and to collect data where we can assess the impacts of risk communication messages. So again, this is an interdisciplinary research project that has implications for actually impacting the real world, if you will. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Dr. Bragg.
Thank you, Dr. Adams. And I want to make a few points based on Dr. Adams' presentation. Number one, we see why Howard University hired her, and I hope they're paying her a nice big fat salary because she's an excellent professor and researcher, as demonstrated by her presentation. And we have evidence of that here at FAMU because one of her former students is now a professor in the Department of Sociology here, Dr. Milanika Turner, and she has energized the environmental justice research here at FAMU. I also want to point out that Dr. Adams mentioned sort of where we are with environmental justice. She gave a historical perspective in part of her presentation. And I just want to bring to people's attention that Senator Cory Booker, in the 30th year of the anniversary for the summit, when people first met under the People of Color Summit on Environmental Justice, in the 30th anniversary year of 2021, Senator Booker introduced an environmental justice bill. And Dr. Adams pointed out that all of these executive orders we're talking about are not law. They just manage and direct the executive branch. Now that bill is still sitting and it hasn't been moved on, but I just want to bring your attention to that. So that would make environmental justice and addressing environmental justice a law. The other thing I wanted to point out again about the, in 2021 was the 30th anniversary of the first National People of Color Environmental Leadership Summit. And I just want to share a quote from one of those participants, Peggy Shepard. She's the co-founder and executive director of We Act for Environmental Justice, and this is located in New York City. And her statement is, when I came to the summit as a delegate, it was the first time I really understood that there were hundreds of groups like mine working on similar issues around the country. It was a life-changing event. We had a committee of people who began to work night and day on developing the 17 principles of environmental justice. And if you look at those principles, you'll see that all of them are totally relevant today. They're important values that we all hold dear and an important roadmap for the future. So here we are today, and that's one of the reasons our subtitle is Governance and Information in a Multi-Level World. I think through this presentation, you should have learned that it takes science, it takes natural or physical sciences, it takes the social sciences, and it also takes the everything to address the challenges and opportunities that are before us. And I think real simply, it comes down to our relationship with the earth. And when we talk about that, it starts with our relationship with each other. And clearly, through this presentation, that's something we need to work on. So with that, if Dr. Adams, if you'll go to the next slide. Okay, I just wanted to make out a few points before we go to our question and answer period. So NOAA, again, we want to acknowledge that NOAA is following the executive order, and they're making efforts, and they've been participating in environmental justice research and policy in decision making. And just here are some of the key points that if you hit that link, you will find more information. So the NOAA is involved in research on environmental justice. NOAA applies and makes available its data products and services that can facilitate environmental justice research. And then NOAA has other programs that support environmental justice. And what I want to point out is number 3, educational partnership program with minority serving institutions and cooperative science centers. That's y'all or us. Next slide. So with that, we really want to come to the most interactive part of our presentation. And our title again was Environmental Justice at NOAA and within the academic community. So now we want to talk about problem solving. And so we have these questions we want to engage you in. And so if we can get those mics going, I think, do we just want to ask the questions? Okay. So we want to ask these questions and get some discussion going. And we'll go with the first one. What are the climate justice or environmental justice issues in your university or community or hometown? Can you speak louder? Okay. Thank you. And if you could, the next person, say your name and who you're affiliated with prior to your statement. Thank you. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Keith Sellers. I'm an EPP MSI scholar. I'm actually studying in Alaska, and one of the ecological issues that's kind of relevant back home where I live, there are some communities that are really affected by coastal erosion, and so sometimes even poor communities can be on the gap between some, pretty serious wave action and then more protected areas. And so sometimes even just driving down the highway, you can see that there's really nothing in place to stop some of those communities from literally falling into the ocean. And it's a big deal. And I don't feel like there's a lot being done about it.
Okay, next. A very good point on the food part.
Yeah, hi, I'm Stella. I'm from the University of Arizona, and I'm also an EPP MSI scholar. And one issue that was kind of addressed earlier, but heat in Arizona is a really big issue. And in Tucson particularly, the town is sort of divided, and the southern part of Tucson doesn't have a lot of green infrastructure, and it's really, really hot. It's a lot of ashfall, and it can get several degrees hotter than the parts of the city that are wealthier in the summer, which is a really big difference, and it causes heat-related deaths. And so we have things like cooling centers to try to mitigate that, but it is still a really big environmental justice issue in our area that hasn't been fully addressed, and it predominantly impacts people of color.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Travis. I'm a graduate scholar from California State University, Monterey Bay. I wanted to add what Connie mentioned about our workers. So similarly related to the pesticides, we have anthropogenic disease outbreaks, COVID potentially being one of them. And throughout the pandemic, the Salinas farm workers were underprepared with PPE and forced to work during the height of the pandemic to keep food on everybody's table. And it was a huge issue that was largely overlooked, and I'm not sure if it was ever rectified.
You have somebody in the, yeah.
Oh,
Who's in that? Whoever has the mic, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Miles Jordan. I'm in CCME at FAMU, and I'm from Arizona, but my family is originally from Tennessee. Well, my dad's side is from Memphis. And one thing my dad really talked about in Memphis, where he grew up in Douglas, that near the neighborhood is like a waste treatment plant, not too far, and it's had a really bad impact on the neighboring community there.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just one example.
Thanks. Okay, we'll have one more to this question, and I see one down here. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Kier Simpson. I'm a former NOAA CCD graduate scholar from Florida A&M University. I'm currently the executive expert for Black and Women's Science. I'm from Melbourne, Florida. Last year, they opened up an apartment complex on an illegal dumping site. There was a site that they were dumping all types of waste in Melbourne for 50 to 60 years. And they just built an apartment complex for low income housing. So they moved in some homeless people, veterans, people that have some type of economic disparity. However, the property was contaminated with carcinogenic compounds such as arsenic, and there was another compound that I saw in the news article, but they still moved people in, and they said, we're just going to see what happens.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Mia Trevino. I'm a master's student at University of Texas at El Paso. I'm originally from South Texas, where I also live in a border community. And it is along the Gulf Coast in South Texas, where we do see lots of hurricanes, lots of rain. And so you do see flooding, and the majority of flooding occurs in low-income neighborhoods where the drainage infrastructure is not updated. And so a lot of these people are living in like 3 or 4 feet of water for extended periods of time, while the water takes time to completely be absorbed by the ground. And then a lot of times in border communities throughout the US, we see a lot of makeshift communities called colonias, which are majority inhabited by undocumented immigrants. They are primarily located outside of the city limits, where these residents do not have the same access to city infrastructures like plumbing, electricity, water, plumbing, things like that. So these communities are disproportionately exposed to, harmful toxins and landfills, and they don't have the proper drainage for things, so they're often living around standing water and just hazardous materials.
Okay, so we have one here in the back, and then if we can bring the mic down to the front here. No, oop. I tried.
So, I'm sorry. So where I grew up, we would say where there's poverty, there's crime. And I've had a lot of friends to die from gun violence throughout my years of life. And so I just wanted to bring to the light that certain geographical areas, due to demographics and where they are and political issues, contribute to continual gun violence, which I feel is we know it's a public health issue, which ties in environmental justice, but there are certain groups of people that may deal with societal issues, and they result to crime due to chronic poverty.
Okay, thanks. Right here.
Hello, my name is Moses Roots. I am a atmospheric physicist in University of Maryland, Baltimore County. I did my undergrad at Hampton University. I'm from Hampton, Virginia. I just wanted to quickly bring to the attention that in that area, there's a gigantic pile of coal on the downtown Newport News area, and across from the bridge on that side, that's in the downtown Newport News area. That's where most of the underrepresented minorities live in that area. And this pile of coal is, there to supply all the ships that come in for the naval base, which is the largest one in the world in Norfolk, and then also the shipyard that's there as well. And then also at Hampton University, there's a giant pile of coal that's behind some of the dorms that isn't gated off. And when it rains, all of that just goes right into the water, which contributes to the degradation of the Chesapeake Bay and the air quality in the area.
Thank you. Okay, our last one on this question is right here.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Nash. I attend Hampton University and I'm a part of LMR CSC. And I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and there in underrepresented areas, there's something called food deserts. So there's not a grocery store or any way to get groceries close to low income families and areas. And the soils are, of course, degraded because it's a desert. So it would take a massive amount of money to be able to grow food themselves. So there's the disparity in the food availability within those low income areas.
Great, thank you. Dr. Adams, can we go to back to the next question? Okay, are there commonalities among the issues? And we'll put two of them together. Are there commonalities among the issues, and how would you address these issues from your own discipline? So we've heard a lot of what's going on. What commonalities or threads or interconnections do you see? And then how, in what you're doing now or what you may plan to do in the future, can you bring your research skills and your academic discipline to the table?
If anyone needs a reminder, just quickly to go over the topics, we have improper waste, coastal erosion, pesticide exposure, anthropogenic disease outbreaks, heat with a lack of green space, waste treatment plants in spaces too close to communities, former waste sites at housing areas, insufficient water drainage, gun violence, food deserts, and I don't even know where to put the coal.
Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Okay. I'm Savannah Clax, and I attend Savannah State University. I'm an undergrad senior. One of the commonalities that one of my research projects actually focused on was coastal erosion, and I worked at looking how climate change can impact the Gullah Geechee corridor under Dr. Hoskins Brown and Dr. Amanda Koltenberg. And what I found was those communities need a lot of help with coastal resilience and the proper funds and support to keep these coastal communities protected from these issues.
Okay. Don't forget to stand up when you speak so we can catch you on the camera. And speak louder.
Hello. Okay. Hello, my name is Stephanie. I'm from UTEP, and something that we can see in common are I live in the desert, and I've heard other people speaking about desertification, and we can identify these issues using remote sensing, like satellite images, to identify maybe the areas that are getting affected by this over the years, and also using data to see which communities are low income and also have been facing like these heat island effects. And remote sensing is something that we can use to identify that.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Julio Ceniceros. I am a Cesart scholar, also from the University of Texas at El Paso. And one thing I saw in common between all these things is that they have possible solutions. If we just give them enough time and money, most of these issues can be solved if we give it the time and the attention it requires.
Thank you. Very excellent point. Anyone else? Okay, Dr. Adams, we're going to move to the next question. Okay, how can you work with others? How can you work with others to study and add efforts to combat the problem? So what about collaboration?
Hello, hello. All right, awesome.
So one way in terms of working with others would be talking with some of the local fishermen, especially around Biscayne Bay, not only because of their useful source of information if they've been there for decades, but also by making them aware of some facts that they may not be aware of. You know, maybe they see, oh, the seagrass has declined, but they don't know why. They don't know some of these linkages. And so that collaboration of information of both scientific as well as people that go out there and depend on the area, that's kind of collaboration is pretty key. I would say so.
Very good. Very good point. No other collaborators amongst us? How do y'all get your work done if you're not collaborating?
Hello, my name is Takaya Reeves. I'm an undergrad second year from Hampton University. I guess I just had the idea from the talk as well to talk with these indigenous populations about how they have managed the land in the past and how we could better manage the land for the future. Yeah, that's
Okay, thank you. Right here, we got some right here.
Hello, my name is Ashley Lacey. I am a PhD candidate at the Florida A&M University, and I am a NOAA CCME graduate scholar. One of the ways with my research that I plan to collaborate is by creating a community engagement assessment survey, because I believe in order to help communities, we need to first figure out what do they know, what don't they know, and what they need. And me being the NOAA CCME scholar, I want more of the underserved communities to know more about the NOAA entity and the services and products they provide. So my first step is to analyze the products NOAA has, interact with NOAA officials, and then create on top of the survey that I've already created, the things that they provide so that I can interact with the communities to get them to get engaged more. So it kind of relays into the NOAA Citizen Science Strategic Plan.
Thank you. Okay, I know these CCM scholars are getting big stipends, so you got to answer these questions.
Hey, how are you? My name is Naved, and I'm from the CESART program. And it seems like most problems that we're dealing with today require an interdisciplinary focus, and not just the experience they bring from their majors or their discipline, but even the personal experiences can be a wealth of value in solving these problems. Thank you.
Excellent point.
Hi, my name is Adore Knight. I am my bad. I'm an undergraduate senior at Howard University, and I'm a NCAS M fellow in cohort 5. And I believe that we could assist the communities through collaborating with grassroots efforts that are already being mobilized, focusing on certain areas that we want to address, and combining different technical skills with the community base that may already exist. Thank you.
Very good point. So you're not one for reinventing the wheel, right? We want to bring these connections and these different spaces together that already exist and leverage that into the solutions. Thank you.
It's Kiera Simpson again. I want to piggyback off of everybody about the community outreach. It's definitely important. Interacting with the community and letting the community know about the problems that are going on is very important, because a lot of the times when I talk to people, they don't know what's going on in their community as far as environmental dangers or health concerns. So that's the main focus, get the community involved. Second, things like this, conferences where we all interact as scientists and other professionals. This is a network where we're telling each other what's going on in the world. So now that we have that, we can go back into our communities with more knowledge, as well as the network that we're building right now, and take the education and things that we have to help fix the problem But now we have a bigger community of people because now you have everyday people as well as professionals. Now you take that and you take that to your political leaders and the people that are making the laws and making the changes. I believe that is really where you go because it's a multi-level problem. It's not just one individual's issue to fix. These are things that happen over the course of years. It's going to take time. But the first thing is letting people become aware of the situations that are going on, especially the communities that are being impacted. And then once you do that and get all the professionals and the community involved, take that to the people that are in these political positions that get paid these monies and these funds to help these things, make that an issue, put it in their face, because then now that it's in their faces, they can't continue to ignore it.
Yeah, very good point. And those funds include your tax dollars, those of you who are working, and your parents and your family members. That's where all this money comes from, that's paying these stipends and having this conference, right? It's all tax dollars appropriated by Congress.
Hello, I am I McWilliams, a CCME scholar from Jackson State. And the previous lady kind of said my answer. I was going to say political leaders to create the policies and regulations to prohibit the injustices from happening in the first place, especially when it comes to the waste management, with the pesticides, with a lot of things we can handle and target by creating the policies necessary to prohibit in the first place.
Thank you. And I'm sure you're referencing those of us in the room who are going to be future political leaders and take all this cooperative science and their knowledge and make some very good laws and policies. Well, not if they're not going to talk. Go ahead, right there.
Yeah, Miles Jordan again, FAMU, CCME. Similar to what Chris was saying from UMass, I feel like working with locals and fishermen and farmers is really helpful. For example, Killa and I are on a buoy project called Rattler Moji, and so what we do is we're working with oyster farmers down in Spring Creek, where we give them this buoy that helps sense water quality and pH and different values like that, so it can help them predict when they can put out their oyster batches, and in turn they help make artificial reefs, oyster reefs, so it can help fight erosion in Spring Creek.
Travis Liggett from CSU Monterey Bay again. In my own personal life, we've had an opportunity to collaborate with the Ocean Protection Council. So they came to our institute and discussed some of the plans that they were drafting, and they got insight into some of the projects that we're working on and the data that we're observing before it reached publication, before it could come out to the masses. And so I think that sort of integration and collaboration is really important to get to some of these issues at their root before they pass through some of the lengthy processes to be publicly available.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi, my name is Mariana Leon Perez. I am from TAMU CC. And I think that also going beyond interdisciplinary research and looking and going towards transdisciplinary research where all the stakeholders and everybody is involved in the research since the beginning and through all the phases of it. So maybe that would be also important to do.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sering Bakembe and I'm from City College and my major is civil engineering. So I think we gotta collaborate with the community, and through that we should go through the nonprofit organization because they're the one who touch base with the community. And if we work with them, then in that case, we can get to the community. And like myself, I'm working in a project where we deal with the urban heat island. Then also I'm doing nonprofit organization named NST. So through that, being with the community and working with them, I realized that that's how we can get back to the community. So thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on. No, we have one more. Did somebody have something? Go ahead.
Hello again, it's Savannah. One of the main issues with all these problems is money. So one of the main collaboratives that you could work with are investors. And that's something we did in Louisville when I was in high school, is working with investors to create a mobile grocery store to help with the food insecurity and bring groceries to local communities that didn't have them before.
Thank you. Very interesting. Okay, Dr. Adams, we're going to go to the next question. In what ways can the educational partnership program with minority serving institutions and cooperative science centers integrate environmental justice? Maybe we need some of the faculty to answer too.
I would say one way, Chris Mbesto Tubu, LMRCSC second year PhD student. I would say that one way that the cooperative science centers can address environmental change is by creating these opportunities for minorities and underrepresented communities to go out and, let's say they grew up in areas where like they couldn't go fishing, they have no idea what water quality issues that their family has been facing for generations. By bringing them into the science and showing them what the biggest problems are, it opens their eyes, and then they can take that back home to their families and their friends.
Thank you.
Hello, it's Maya again. And what I was thinking was focusing more on community-based research to ensure that we're keeping the communities that are affected by these issues in mind and keeping their opinions and their perspectives in mind also.
Thank you.
Hello, Kelsey Martin from Team UCC. Oh, it's weird hearing myself. At Team UCC, we have it's called a swim program, but basically it's a cooperative program with Cuba and to help Cuba basically start managing their own fisheries because their fisheries have been really declining. And so we've been working with them to try and build a fisheries management plan so that they can actually have the resources that they need to sustain their fisheries.
Hello, it's Takaya Reeves again. I think what we're doing right now is a really important aspect. Like we're all talking about our own backgrounds, our own experiences, and to come together as EPP, MSI scholars, including the faculty, and going back to our home institutions, bringing that knowledge back like some others were saying, and implementing it at our universities and at our institutions so that maybe even in the community where you are going to school, there is something that's going on there that you can learn from and go out there and do outreach for that community and also bring that back to where you live and apply those like things, like whatever you're going to do in their outreach, like apply those to wherever you're coming from. Like, cause I just keep hearing like everyone giving their own backgrounds. People from where they're coming from are talking about like, this is what I see in my community. Okay, well, we're here talking about it now. We can figure out something to do about it.
Very, very good point. And part of that is more people talking and then getting to the doing. And I see most of the same people doing the talking here. So we want to be more confident in what we have to say. I know y'all have something to say because your parents have been paying for you to go to school or sending you lunch money, and the federal government's paying your stipend. So I know you've learned something from great professors like Dr. Terry Adams and all of your faculty members. So I'm sure you have something to say. So don't be shy.
The EPP program has allowed me to focus on sociology, studying those connections between people. So what I understand, and I'm so glad to hear that most of my colleagues, such as Ashley, she mentioned participatory action research and community-based research involving the community. I remember when COVID came out, it was the interrogation and the accusations against the scientists that we created this, that we don't know what's going on. So to reduce the amount of uncertainty within our own population and within the general population which we serve. We are working together with the community in community science and participatory action research to create more of a democratic approach to these environmental issues, which are very complex. Taking the accounts, the young lady mentioned the backgrounds of everyone and our experiences. So combining the qualitative data with the quantitative data, it allows for a comprehensive approach and a full picture to what's going on. So I think that is a good way to go forward with our continued studies.
Bob Rabin with NOAA. Dr. Adams mentioned the long history of social injustice with First Nations and indigenous communities in America.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to suggest maybe considering partnerships between the CSCs and tribal colleges. There's 37 tribal colleges across the nation here. And the core of much of their research is environmental issues facing their communities. And I think NOAA has some things that could offer them from the science end or the data end that they could offer the rich history and connection to their communities and the problems they're dealing with.
That's a very good point. And maybe one of these newer CCM Cooperative Science Center scholars, I have a feeling that NOAA has been doing a lot of EJ work. They just haven't defined it as such. And so maybe we need a couple students, one or more students, to do that research to help NOAA determine what it has been doing. I'm sure it's been doing a lot. It's just not labeled as such.
Hi, David Garcia, LMR CSC fellow. And I was thinking that one of the ways we can address this is like, first of all, we have to address the bias. And so you can educate the students about environmental justice and such as part of the curriculum or some of our trainings. And then address the bias. And so therefore, like we could implement some environmental justice issues into our projects and research. I think a collaboration with those schools that were mentioned just a second ago is a really great idea.
Thank you. We've got somebody down front. Okay, go ahead.
Hello, I am Andrea Pugh Kelly, and I am a CCME scholar here at FAMU. I'm a PhD student, and I think that we should really take advantage of the requirement that we have. I know at least through CCME, we have to fulfill a social science requirement. So you can always use that as an opportunity to tie that back into addressing real world issues and just engaging in things that are, impacting communities that you live in. For example, I am from a post-industrial city, and not only am I using my research to broaden NOAA's research missions, but also address an issue that's facing my everyday life living in Michigan and our drinking water quality and emerging contaminants in the Great Lakes. So just really broadening your research mindset, I guess, when you look at the environment and what that can actually look like. I guess that kind of starts maybe at the undergraduate level of introducing different research areas or broadening your research area to be able to address things in a different way, to bring in the social science aspect, which can broaden out to environmental science, to environmental justice.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jalen Leslie. I'm a LMR CSC graduate fellow from Hampton University. And just something that we did on our campus when I was an undergrad, it was with Seeds Ecology Club, and we did a recycling drive. And instead of us just doing it within like our department, we wanted to raise awareness on campus, so like the lack of recycling around our campus. And it was actually really insane, just like how much us advocating for it and talking about it and promoting this recycling drive on campus really shifted people to like understanding like environmental impacts of our actions. And we had a really good turnout to the drive, and we had boxes set up in the dorms and collected them afterwards. So, and we also collaborated with other organizations on campus. And so that's just an example of like something that we did where we brought in other people around our campus, and then also we're able to use those like tactics in our hometowns, because that's something I did afterwards. I went home and I talked to my family and like peers there, and it's like, this is something, you know, we need to start implementing, and just like raising awareness on the campus. It was really, I don't know what the word is, but it was nice to see that like once people were aware of the issue, they were more willing to support our cause and started participating in it. So yeah.
Okay, our last one right here.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah. My name is Kyle Lenenberg. I'm a doctoral student of ecology at San Diego State University. I want to take a minute to acknowledge that, you know, especially those of us in academia can be really important uniters in our community. You know, we get a lot of freedom and privilege with our roles and responsibilities we can take on, whereas some of these experts or these stakeholders spend their whole lives on certain issues and sometimes can't outreach to other groups like we can. So it's nice that we, you know, get this freedom to connect with so many groups. It can be a really nice uniting force.
And since I have the microphone, I'm just going to really quickly.
Okay,
add
go ahead.
My 2 cents. So I'm Shadia Sanders. I'm a recent graduate of Howard University in atmospheric sciences, but study interdisciplinary societal impacts of extreme weather. My suggestion as an NCAS-M graduate would be, I think it would be really great for the students to get support, students, faculty, staff, everybody to get support in promoting their science outside of academic journals. I know that that's a really big thing, but I think it'd be really great if we could get support in doing op-eds, TED Talks. I don't know if there's some way to get a good TikTok of all of us of like what we would do, but I guess support in doing sort of non-academic outreach and reaching other people through the mediums that they're used to getting stuff from.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to thank Dr. Terry Adams and Dr. Vankita Brown for their excellent presentations. And I want to remind everybody that Earth Day 2022, what's the theme? Invest in our planet. And I want to congratulate you all here for doing just that. Thank you.
I know it's been a long day, isn't it? But it's been a rewarding day. Would you do me a favor? Raise your right hand. Now place it over your shoulder. Pat yourself on the back because you made it through the first day. We look forward to seeing you on tomorrow, but I need you to go into that app and do evaluate. You need to evaluate. How did you enjoy these? We need to know what your feedback is. How were the technical sessions? Those who presented, and don't forget, there is a monetary reward for first, second, and third in several categories. The checks will be ready on Friday. Poster sessions will happen on tomorrow. So if you've not gotten your poster up, please do so. So one more time, we'd like for you to enjoy the rest of the evening with your group and explore Tallahassee before the rain comes. But with that being said, we thank you for making this challenge and coming to Tallahassee. You know, it is good to see real live faces. And those of you online, you're missing the party, but that's okay. We'll look forward on the next time. So look, have a good evening and we'll see you tomorrow. You could do better than that. Okay.